This is Puget Sound, an intricate network of 1,400 miles of inland coastlines and waterways. Imagine how this maze of land and water must have confused early explorers. Maps of the North American coast have existed since the 15th century, but they weren't much help since map makers relied heavily on their imagination. Puget Sound was sketched in as an enormous ocean. In 1792, the British dispatched George Vancouver, an experienced sea captain, to explore the region. His journey started here, along the Strait of Juan de Fuca. In daily journal entries, Vancouver recorded his impressions. Our attention was immediately called to a landscape almost as enchantingly beautiful as the most elegantly finished pleasure grounds of Europe. I could not possibly believe that any uncultivated country had ever been discovered exhibiting so rich a pasture. From the water, Vancouver charted Mount Baker and Mount Rainier. He explored the length of small waterways and islands, giving them names we still use: Port Townsend, Admiralty Inlet, Vashon Island, he discovered which of the narrow and intricate channels ships would be able to navigate. Captain Vancouver was well satisfied with his explorations and named the inlet in honor of his young lieutenant, Peter Puget. Vancouver predicted a promising future for Puget Sound, but he never could have imagined this. The Pacific Northwest has long held a special fascination for Americans. Yet until the dawning of the 19th century, very little was actually known about this region, since early exploration had largely been limited to the coastline. The resulting mystery of the land made it a source of constant speculation among expansion-minded Easterners. Was it land ripe for new settlement, or was it a dark and dangerous wilderness best left uninhabited? By the early 1800s, the debate had spilled over into the halls of Congress. Proponents were anxious to expand the boundaries of the young nation beyond the Mississippi. Critics argued against staking reckless claims to uncharted lands. It was President Thomas Jefferson, one of the most enthusiastic students of the West, who took steps to settle the debate. He commissioned an expedition to be led by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to chart a course across the continent and explore the land. With a letter of credit from the president, Lewis and Clark set out from St. Louis in the spring of 1804 on their journey to the Pacific coast, some 2,300 miles away. It took the expedition about 17 months to reach what is today the eastern border of Washington state. With extensive help from Native Americans, whose lifestyle they carefully documented along the way, the party traveled west along the Snake and Columbia rivers. The landscape they passed through has, in some ways, remained unchanged. Lewis and Clark noted the mountain vistas, the towering faces of what we know today as Mount Hood and Mount Rainier, the rolling tree-covered slopes of the west, and the dry, arid expanses of the east. But they also had to deal with natural elements that have since been tamed. The Columbia River today quiet behind a row of concrete dams, astonished the expedition with its raging waters and dangerous rapids. When the expedition finally reached the Pacific coast in December of 1805, the group was ecstatic. As Clark noted in his journal, "Great joy in camp. We are in view of the ocean, this great Pacific Ocean, which we have been so long anxious to see." The journey west had taken them 18 months and had been long, exhausting, and dangerous. But Lewis and Clark had proved what President Jefferson had suspected. The cross-country journey was possible, and the land was extremely valuable. The westward migration to the Pacific Northwest had begun. This is the Columbia River, the vital artery of the Pacific Northwest that stretches from the frozen mountains of British Columbia through the stark desert country of eastern Washington to the southwestern tip of our state, where it empties into the Pacific Ocean. The Columbia River was once a source of intrigue in the empires of Europe. It was rumored to provide a direct water passage across North America, an invaluable trade route. By the 18th century, rival nations were sending out explorers to find and lay claim to the Columbia. They were largely unsuccessful. Some simply couldn't find the entrance off the Pacific coast. Others were defeated by the treacherous sandbars that guard the mouth of the Columbia. Land along the coast was dotted with names like Deception Bay and Cape Disappointment by frustrated explorers. But the English weren't about to give up. They dispatched one of their best navigators, Captain George Vancouver. He sailed the length of the coast from California to British Columbia, hugging the coastline tightly. But despite his careful scrutiny, he too failed to sight the mouth of the Columbia and gave up the search. As Vancouver sailed north, an American trader named Robert Gray was probing south along the same shoreline, looking for trade opportunities with the coastal Indians. It was on this trade junket that Captain Gray spotted the entrance to the fabled river. He named it after his ship, the Columbia, and for days tried unsuccessfully to cross the breaking waves at the mouth of the river. Finally, on May 11, 1792, the captain awoke to light winds and a calm sea. He set his sails, and in a journey repeated today by ships of all kinds, cautiously navigated upriver. Captain Gray's discovery of the Columbia River was one of America's most significant maritime achievements. The Columbia, though not the hoped-for passage across the continent, was America's first claim to the rich, uncharted lands that would later become Washington State.